Hey guys, so our group is doing our presentation on Parkinson's disease. So a little bit about our presentation is we're going to talk about what Parkinson's is and the historical background. Then we're going to talk about the overview of the disease and discuss some of the symptoms, the treatments, how it's diagnosed, and the psychological side of the disease. Then we'll move on to the physiology of Parkinson's and we'll talk about how the disease really works. And then lastly, we'll end with some review questions. So Parkinson's disease, or PD, is a complex progressive neurodegenerative disease that's usually characterized by tremors, rigidity, and then as the disease progresses, you'll see some walking, balance, and coordination issues. So the causes of PD are that certain nerve cells or neurons in the brain will gradually break down and eventually die. And the symptoms of PD often result from the fact that when these neurons die, they stop producing a chemical messenger in your brain that's called dopamine. And because dopamine is not being produced, it leads to less fluid motions. So PD was first described as a shaking palsy by James Parkinson in 1817 and was further characterized by Jean-Martin Charcot. And he was able to distinguish the disease from multiple sclerosis and other disorders that are often characterized by tremors. And while the causes of Parkinson's disease are still not known, our knowledge of PD is really still continuing to expand. So some of the symptoms of PD are tremors, slowed movements, rigid muscles, and then you'll see some impaired posture and balance issues, along with autonomic movement loss. You'll also see some changes in speech and writing, and then irregular blood pressure and fatigue. And usually these symptoms don't start to occur until 80% of the dopamine is lost. And here in this picture, you can see this man has an asymmetric resting tremor. He has poor posture. He has slowed movements and he has shuffled steps. So while the symptoms of PD can point towards a possible diagnosis, to have a definitive diagnosis, you would need to do a histopathological assessment in which they take cells from the affected area and view them under a microscope. And if you see the presence of Lewy bodies, then you know the patient has Parkinson's disease. And in this picture, you can see these round structures, and those are the Lewy bodies. And some scientists actually believe the Lewy bodies are what causes the neurons to die, but not enough research has been done to definitively say that that is the cause of Parkinson's disease.
So now that we have an idea of what Parkinson's disease is, how exactly does one go about diagnosing it? Unfortunately, there is not a specific test for that. Instead, a neurologist will have to do a clinical diagnosis based on an individual's medical history, as well as observing speech, handwriting sample, and other signs and symptoms of Parkinson's. Then, in order to rule out stroke as a possible diagnosis, MRI imaging and SPECT, or single proton emissions computerized tomographies, are often done alongside the diagnosis in order to ensure that it is indeed Parkinson's. Next slide. There is currently no permanent cure for Parkinson's, but there are ways to regulate it in various forms of treatment, such as medication, such as dopamine promoter, antidepressants, and anti-tremor medicines, which can directly influence the amount of dopamine one is receiving, or doing various forms of therapy, such as speech therapy or physical therapy, in order to counteract the physical symptoms of Parkinson's. Next slide. One specific treatment that should be incorporated in any kind of Parkinson's treatment plan is exercise. While exercise may not fully reverse the effects of Parkinson's, it can help greatly improve one's quality of life. And there are various forms of exercises that can be done to improve certain functions. For example, doing Tai Chi can help someone improve their flexibility and balance, or doing weightlifting can help improve one's functionality as well as increasing muscle mass. All of these can help counteract the physical impairments that Parkinson's cause. Exercise also plays a very strong role in preventing the disease from happening in the first place. For example, it's been observed that men who start exercising during adulthood greatly reduce their risk of Parkinson's by nearly 60%, on top of all the regular benefits that come with exercising.
The psychiatric symptoms of Parkinson's disease range from depression and anxiety to hallucinations and dementia. Some patients also begin to display violent tendencies when their medication treatment begins, like with levodopa, which is one of the most commonly used drugs for Parkinson's. Nearly 50% of people with Parkinson's display at least one of these symptoms. Moving on to the physiology of the disease, body movement is controlled by a complex chain of nerve cells called ganglia. Information arrives at the striatum, which works with the substantia nigra to send impulses back and forth between the spinal cord and brain. And the basal ganglia and cerebellum are responsible for ensuring that the movement is carried out in a fluid manner. The basal ganglia controls movement, and when nerve cells in that area are impaired or they die, the levels of dopamine produced begin to significantly decrease. This leads to the movement problems that are generally associated with Parkinson's disease.
To further extend the physiology of the disease, when dopamine receptors in the striatum are not adequately stimulated, parts of the basal ganglia are either under or overstimulated. In particular, the subthalamic nucleus, or the STN, becomes overactive and acts as a brake on the globus pallidus interna, or the GPI, causing a shutdown of motion and rigidity. When the GPI is overstimulated, it has an over-inhibitory effect on the thalamus, which in turn decreases thalamus output and causes tremor. Here we have three different models. In the middle, we have the healthy model or the classic model. On the right, we have what a person with Parkinson's experiences, and on the left, we have a dopamine treatment. In the healthy model, you can see that in blue, the dopamine is coming from the SNC to the striatum, which activates the direct pathway in green and inhibits the indirect pathway going towards the IMSN. The figure shows a line ending rather than an arrow like the DMSN has from the dopamine. When this is properly working, GPI output is decreased, releasing inhibition on the thalamus and cortex, and it promotes movement. On the right, we can see what is happening with a person who has Parkinson's. The loss of SNC dopamine causes hyperactivity of the indirect pathway, where in the healthy model it was inhibited. This leads to excessive GPI output, leading to the slow movements people who suffer from Parkinson's experience. The left shows the result of a treatment of dopamine, restoring the once imbalance of indirect and direct pathways. The indirect pathway becomes less active, thus allowing the patient to move at a better pace than before. The Parkinson's disease symptoms of tremor and stiffness occur when the nerve cells fire and there is not enough dopamine to transmit messages. High levels of glutamate, another neurotransmitter, also appear in Parkinson's as the body tries to compensate for the lack of dopamine.
So, question one is the cause of Parkinson's disease is when neurons stop producing which of these chemical messengers? A. Serotonin, B. Norepinephrine, C. Dopamine, or D. Glutamate? And here you'll see the answer C. Dopamine.
The second question is, how is Parkinson's disease diagnosed? A, with a blood test, B, with a neurological exam, C, with an MRI scan, or D, all of the above? Parkinson's disease is diagnosed with a neurological exam. For the third question, which of the following is not a treatment for Parkinson's disease? A, anti-tremor medication, B, dopamine promoter, C, insulin medication, or D, physical therapy? The correct answer for what is not a treatment is C, insulin medication. And for our final question, what are some other forms of exercise a person with Parkinson's can do? A, running, B, Tai Chi, C, hiking, or D, yoga? The answer to the question is Tai Chi. Here are our references, and thank you so much for listening in.